Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Big Game Hunters. I'm Mike.
And I'm Tom. Just a reminder for our fans that we've got a Kickstarter going to fund Season 3, so check out that link below. Today we're going to look at Bang, the exciting Wild West social game of law and outlaw. But first, chit-chat.
In today's chit-chat, we're going to be talking about false choices. The idea that certain games present what seem like a lot of viable options, but only one can actually lead you to victory. We hope you enjoy it. Welcome to the Chit Chat. Today, we're going to be talking about false choices. So false choices, Tom, I think of them as being paths to victory in a game that are really not viable. Specifically, I think of false choice games or games that are plagued by the problem of false choice as being ones that only really have one clear way to play. Now, I think it's important to distinguish between this and something we talked about in another Chit Chat, which is elegance, specifically removing fluff from games.
Sure.
In that one, we talked about elements in games that are rarely used or that aren't very effective, but those were usually options that you could do on a turn, but you would never build a strategy around. They were not full paths to victory. Mm-hmm. For instance, healing in epic duels or the double draw bonus in seasons. You could do these things, but you usually don't. But again, they're not a full path to victory, so they don't really play in a false choice. I think the seminal example of a false choice game, or a game that features heavy false choice, is Monopoly. Everyone's familiar with it. Monopoly, when you land on a property, the first few times around the board, you were given the choice to purchase it or put it up for auction. This is a clear false choice. Everybody who's played Monopoly knows that if you put a property up for auction, you're screwed. You have to buy everything you can as soon as you can. So it's a game where you could do that, but you really can't if you expect to win.
We discussed a similar aspect of Quarriors not too long ago. You have the tableau of things you can choose from, but on most turns you're just going to choose the most powerful spell or creature that you can afford at the time. It's pretty rare that you're going to get something cheaper in order to combo with or pay for something that's higher on the list. But that's pretty rare that comes up. It's usually just your decision is just to summon or buy the most powerful thing you can.
Yeah, that's true. Another one I'm thinking of is, this is an older title, but Queen's Gambit. I played it a few times, and it seems to me that it's one that you have to play essentially movie accurately. You have to devote resources to fighting Darth Maul in the reactor core, to taking out the Viceroy in the Theed. You have to put some effort into the Gungans versus the battle droids fight, and you have to put effort into space. And if you try to focus on one fight, for instance, I really wanted to try to focus on the fight in the reactor and have the two Jedi beat Darth Maul quickly, and then go out into Theed and clean house because they had amazing stats. This really wasn't viable. The game pretty much forced you to play it accurately. You could focus maybe first on getting the Queen on the Queen's path and getting the Viceroy down. But other than that, there was really not much. There was decision making, but there was not much of an overarching strategy you could choose from.
I think that's a relevant point. The decision making, it's sort of the idea behind why these things are included. It sort of gives the illusion of decision making without really giving that power. You see this tactic a lot in video games. At least I do. Specifically, the first time I realized it was Final Fantasy VII. You can easily play that game almost all the way to the end. But you reach a certain point where if you're just skipping around to boss fights and story elements, you quickly find out that you are underleveled for what you need to be to advance the story, and that's because you aren't following the other options in the game of whatever else there is, just the side quests. The
so you could choose to breeze through it,
right?
But if you do make that choice, you're going to get stymied. You have to really choose at some point to grind.
So the idea there is, I think, they're giving you the illusion of choice, but these aren't really choices. You have to pursue something.
Yeah, absolutely. Now it's hard to find examples in games we've looked at because we're mostly looking at games that we like.
Right.
And in most of those, they're not going to feature a lot of false choices that we're aware of because otherwise we wouldn't be interested.
Yeah, Quarriors is the only one that really came the closest to having a true false choice. And even that wasn't a true false choice because you can do other things. It's just hard to justify them as paths to victory.
Yeah, rarely do they work.
Right.
But we have looked at some games where there are options presented that are not viable, even though they may not be, like you said, illusions of a good option. Something that comes to mind is Blue Moon City. In Blue Moon City, I have seen players on their first game head out into a different section of the city than the other players. In a 4-player game, one person went off on their own and started building a completely different section of the city, and she got crushed because it's really not viable. In Blue Moon City, you have to work with other people.
In order to score the big points, you have to be working with other people.
Yeah, you have to, exactly. You have to work with other people, and you can't just focus on, for instance, one aspect, like Dragon Scales.
Right.
You have to be able to work with other people and kind of... Now, there's a lot of decision-making in Blue Moon City. The game isn't killed by that. But that is a strategy that looks on the surface to be viable, but it really isn't.
Same kind of thing in Risk 2210, one of my favorite games. It does have a lot of luck involved, but the strategy that's there, you make your choices between which commander card. You may combo them, but usually you're just going to invest heavily in one type of commander and use that as your strategy to beat everyone else. The exception being if you do that with the space commander and go with the goal of focusing only on the moon, you're going to lose because you will definitely control the moon if you invest that heavily in it, but the moon isn't enough to win you the game. You have to combo the space commander with some other commander.
Right, which isn't true of the others.
It's not true of the others. The others you can usually win just by focusing on those.
Yeah, I mean, you see it a little bit in the game we're going to be looking at today, Bang. In Bang, the outlaws are all going to be trying to work together, potentially covertly, in order to kill the sheriff. Now, the problem with that is every time I've seen the outlaws try to play sneakily, every time I've seen them try to lay low and not get discovered as being outlaws because it's a secret role game, it ends up not working out for them. The outlaws have to be aggressive early or else they're just going to get taken out because the sheriff will amass too many resources, and the sheriff's usually going to start firing at people because the odds are good for him that he's going to be shooting outlaws. Sure. And even if he doesn't, somebody's going to start firing shots. There's no way that everybody around the table is going to play enough of a pacifist game for the outlaws to really lay low, build up, and then go on the sheriff.
I guess sort of the inverse of that and the inverse of Blue Moon Cities is World of Warcraft, where you can choose to work together, so that's the inverse of Blue Moon Cities, and you can choose to be defensive, inverse of Bang, but if you make both of those choices in the World of Warcraft board game, and you do that consistently throughout the game, you're going to end up being behind the opposing team, who generally will employ the tactic. Most players will employ the tactic of heading out on your own to defeat monsters. You get more treasure and more experience over the long run than you would if you were trying to share those adventures. Yeah, and that's sort of counterintuitive to that game because it's like a dungeon delving adventuring game.
Yeah, from a D&D background, you never want to split up. Right. So if that's where you're coming to it from, it makes perfect sense. Why do you think these false choices come up in games?
It's an interesting question. I think the only thing you can come up with is that playtesting. That you reach a point in designing a game where, hey, this is a solid game. We've got some nice choices and nice options here, and maybe your playtest group is happy with their results. They had fun. But not enough playtesting goes into it where people start exploring the various strategies and figuring out that some of them just aren't viable to compete with the ones that were initially used in playtesting.
I also think it could be said that this is kind of a two-part issue because we're talking about false choices being, paths to victory that are presented by the game that players take and are basically fall into a trap with because they're not going to resolve victory. But so one thing is that potentially paths could look good but aren't, and that's a playtesting failure. But the other, I think, could be that it is self-evident to the designer that you're not supposed to do X in the game. For instance, in Blue Moon City, we use that as a weak example, but I think it's arguable that, Reiner Knizia in designing it thought, well, this is a game of cooperation and working together to build this city. No player would ever go off alone and try to build it.
Dragon Scales shouldn't be attacked.
Dragon Scales aren't a path to victory on their own. That would be ridiculous. Yeah. And so it probably didn't maybe even cross his mind to think, I should make it clear, or I should make it, obvious that players aren't supposed to go sail off alone and start building different corners of the city. But I have seen people do that, so it's not necessarily obvious to everybody. It could be kind of a miscommunication between the designer of the game and the players in terms of how he or she expects it to be played.
Yeah, that could come through in I think theme more than anywhere else. Grimoire this happened to me with the item deck.
Yes.
It just seems like you have in Grimoire that you have these different tactics. You can go after followers, I think they're called. You can go after
companions.
Companions, sure. You can go after companions. You can go after items. You can go after direct forbidden spells to get points. There's these different
victory point chips.
Yeah. There's different aspects of the game, But if you're the only one investing in the item decks, that's not a good path to victory, because then you're just going to get a handful of junk cards and not enough of those.
With junk, it's important to do just the right amount. Right. It's kind of with the dragon scales too. You have to do more than everyone else.
Yep.
But if you get 5 or 6 junk cards, that's a bad investment.
You've spent too much, yeah.
Exactly.
And that's not initially apparent in the setup of the game, because it looks like 3 separate and potentially equal paths to victory.
Yeah, that's a good example. So do we have anything else to say about these false choices? Any ways to avoid them in design? Any kind of other disclaimers?
Only just by playing the game are you going to really get familiar with your false choices.
Yeah, I agree. And it's something that I think... Oh, you know what? One more. A Few Acres of Snow before we go. I haven't played it, but I've read pretty extensively about the Halifax Hammer, where that game was really lauded when it came out for how great it was. What a great little deck builder war game. Then eventually people discovered playing as one side, you have something like a 90% chance of victory if you play this one specific strategy. And if you don't play it that way, you're screwed. So yeah, just a lot of games this comes up with. As you play them more, you'll hopefully discover them, and they're real killer. Like, I think this would make a score plummet for me for a game like Queen's Gambit, where you have to play it according to the movie.
Wow. Interesting.
So
That's our chit chat. Get ready for Bang.
Now I'm going to teach you how to play Bang. Bang is a hidden role game that gives you the feeling of being in a spaghetti western. The goal of Bang will vary based on the role card you're dealt. If you're playing as the sheriff, the only public role, your goal is to eliminate all the outlaws and the renegade. As soon as you've done so, you will instantly win the game. The deputy's goal is the same as the sheriff. The deputies will have to work to keep the sheriff alive long enough so that together they can eliminate all the outlaws and the renegade. If the sheriff kills a deputy, the sheriff must discard all cards in front of him and all cards in his hand. The outlaws win the game by killing the sheriff. As soon as they've done so, the game ends with the outlaws claiming victory. If an outlaw is killed, the player who killed him, no matter who it is, draws a 3-card bounty. Finally, the renegade wins by being the last man standing. If the renegade is the only character alive in play, then the renegade player wins. Bang comes with all the components you'll need to play out your spaghetti western adventure. Each player will receive a player board. At the top, you'll see a number of slots for your bullets. Your bullets track both your hit points and your maximum hand size. On the left, you'll see a slot for your roll card. Unless you're the sheriff, your roll card is kept hidden until you are killed, at which point you'll reveal it. In the middle, there's a slot for your character. Your character gives you a starting hit point value and a special ability. And on the right, you'll see a slot for a weapon. Every player at least has a Colt 45 at all times, but you can replace this with a better weapon. Bang, of course, includes the roll cards, which will tell you your goal for the game. Again, these will be kept secret, except for the sheriff's. The character cards look like this. They have the name of the character at the top, the number of bullets you'll start play with on the side, and a special ability. The Bang cards are shuffled into a communal deck, which you'll draw from. They come in 3 main flavors. The brown cards are single-use cards. You'll play them, resolve the symbols, and then discard them. Blue cards are more permanent. You'll play a blue card in front of yourself, and it might have an ongoing effect. Some blue cards will destroy themselves using their own effects. Others can be taken away using various cards. Finally, green cards are kind of a hybrid of the previous 2. A green card cannot be used in the turn you play it, but can be used anytime after that. If it has a missed symbol or another symbol that you can use outside of your turn, you can use that effect immediately at the beginning of the next player's turn. However, if it has an effect that can only be used on your own turn, you'll have to wait till it comes back around to you. The Bang cards have a number of symbols on them that will tell you their effects. The first one is the Bang symbol. This symbol means that you'll deal 1 wound, or in other words, take away a bullet from the player that the Bang applies to. You'll see the crossed out card. This is the discarded card symbol. The discarded card symbol means that the player this symbol applies to either loses a random card from his or her hand, or the player playing the card can choose a card from in front of that player to take away. Either way, these cards will be put in the discard pile. A related symbol is the draw symbol. If the draw symbol is not linked to any player, then the player using the draw symbol will simply draw a card from the top of the deck. If, however, it is linked to a specific player, then you will draw a card from that player. You can choose either to draw one from in front of the player and add it to your hand, or draw one at random from their hand and put it in your own. Next up, you'll see the hat. A single hat means that you can apply this effect to any player around the table, regardless of distance. 3 hats means that this effect applies to every player except the player using the card. A beer mug means that the player using this effect will regain 1 bullet or hit point. You cannot exceed your maximum starting hit points with this effect. A hat in the crosshair means that you can apply this effect to any player within your current weapon's range, which I'll explain shortly. And finally, a numeral in a crosshair means that you can apply this effect to any player within that distance. You'll see in Bang a lot of weapon cards. You can only have 1 weapon card out at a time, and it always replaces your previous one in your slot. Each weapon has a range value in the crosshair. In Bang, range works thusly. A range of 1 applies to the player to your immediate right or left. Range 2 is 1 player out from him or her, and so on. When determining range from another player, you'll always use the shortest distance, either clockwise or counterclockwise. A Bang card has the Bang symbol and the player within your range symbol. This means that you can deal 1 damage to any player within the range of your current weapon. A Bang card, specifically, also has an extra caveat. You can only play 1 Bang card per turn. However, you can use multiple Bang symbols on different cards in the same turn. A beer card depicts the beer symbol, which means you can use it to regain a hit point. In addition, there are 2 special rules with beers. You may not play a beer if it is down to you and 1 other player in the game. They become useless in that situation. In addition, if you are down to your last hit point and you would take lethal damage, you can immediately discard a beer card to regain that last hit point and save yourself. There are also symbols, believe it or not, that are not on the reference card. If you see this additional card symbol, the 2 cards equal 2 beers, the 2 card symbol indicates that you must play this card and discard an additional card in order to get the effect. In this case, 2 lost hit points are regained. Sometimes you'll also see the heart in a square symbol or another set of cards in a symbol. This is the draw symbol with an exclamation point. When you draw, you'll reveal the top card of the deck and look at its suit and number in the bottom corner. This, for instance, is an ace of clubs. If you have drawn the appropriate card, in this case the card is looking for a heart, then you'll get the effect. So if jail is in front of you, then if you draw a heart at the beginning of your turn, you are out of jail. Otherwise, you must skip your turn. There's also a caveat on jail that you may not put the sheriff in jail. Finally, you'll sometimes see 2 symbols separated by a little hash mark. In this case, you'll get both effects. So the Bible allows you to use a missed effect to dodge a bang and lets you draw a card. To set up a game of Bang, you'll deal out the roll cards. If you were given the sheriff card, you'll immediately reveal it. Otherwise, you'll keep it face down in front of you. Then, each player is given a random character. You'll then receive a number of bullets based on your character. If you are the sheriff, you will get an additional bullet. Once you've given out your starting bullets, you also get 1 card for every bullet you received from the top of the deck. This forms your starting hand. The sheriff will begin the game as the first player, and gameplay is played clockwise around the table. Now you're ready to begin? Bang. Bang is played out in turns, and on your turn, you'll follow 3 simple steps. First, you'll draw 2 cards from the top of the deck. If there are no cards in the deck, you'll shuffle the discard pile into the deck. Then, you'll play any number of cards you like from your hand, with the 1 caveat, you can only play 1 bang per turn. Finally, you'll discard down to your current hand limit. Your hand limit is determined by the number of bullets you have on your character chart. Play continues in this manner until either the sheriff is dead, which will give the outlaws victory, or the outlaws and the renegade are all dead, which gives the sheriff and the deputies victory, or everyone but the renegade is dead, making him the victor. Now you know how to play? Bang. Now that you know how to play Bang, we're going to take a look at it in our point-counterpoint review.
Because Mike and I agree about the game, I'm going to roll to see who will argue for it and who will argue against. If it's even, I'll take the pros, and if it's odd, he will.
You're on a roll.
Once again, I get to argue for Bang, and Mike will tell us why it sucks.
I will.
Oh, I start, don't I? Pros start. I remember.
I mean, if you have anything to say.
I've done this before.
If you've got a pro, yeah, use it now.
All right. Well, first, the most engaging thing about it is how the art and the theme really come together to make it a fun, light game. So it's a spaghetti western, and the art is really reminiscent of like posters you would see for spaghetti westerns when spaghetti westerns were popular. The rest of the gameplay really evokes like the shootout theme that it's going for. Everybody's playing bang cards and shooting as far as they can at people near to them. All that really comes together to make a fun, light game.
All the blams and stuff kind of remind me of Liechtenstein. I do like the art quite a bit, but it's a kind of well-themed game, but it is certainly not an immersive one. And here's why. The rolls just pull me right out of it. Yes, it's a hidden roll game, but why in the heck would the sheriff not know who his deputies are? Why are they keeping this secret from him? Yeah. It doesn't make any sense.
I don't think they had a vice squad.
Clearly. So it's just, it doesn't really fit the rest of the game. It's not a game of subterfuge and covert operations. It's a game of just unloading on your neighbor and just like shooting a bunch of bullets and turning your friends into Swiss cheese. Yep. It's not a game of, trying to deduce who the other players are. And if they try to play sneaky, as we discussed in our chit chat earlier today, there's not much payout. It's that if playing sneaky seems to make them lose in the long run every time. Mm-hmm. And the rolls themselves, not only does that pull me out of the theme, but I feel like they don't really work well. For instance, it's very hard for the outlaws to win unless at least two of them are positioned next to the sheriff. Because the outlaws need to shoot early and often, they need range to hit the sheriff. Mm-hmm. And if they don't have it, or if they lose a weapon, the only weapon they had, they're screwed. Furthermore, the renegade. Don't even get me started on the renegade. If you get the renegade, you might as well just flip the table because you have basically no chance. The renegade, his role is strictly more difficult than everyone else's at the table. The expansion adds a second renegade, and believe it or not, in the rulebook, they tell you that the renegades can't both win together. Mm-hmm. In other words, you have to just kill another person if you're the expanded 8-player renegade. It's ridiculous. Renegades, just go home now because you can't win Bang.
Speaking of the expansion, that's the only way I've ever played Bang, I think fortunately, because when conceptualizing how it's going to play without the expansion, it seems like a much shorter game. There's a lot of defensive items in the Dodge City expansion is the one we're talking about. Mm-hmm. The Dodge City expansion that extend the game, allow it to develop a little more. So yeah, I can't really disagree that the Renegades are a super disadvantage. But ideally, you're gonna figure out who your partners are, and you're gonna work together until the end of the game, and when everybody else is dead, and then just kill each other. That kind of thing really can't happen without the expansion because the games can end so short with just the core game.
Yeah, it's true. The expansion does somewhat solve the problem of the first turn death in Bang. But the other problem is, for a game like this, I can't for the life of me figure out why they chose symbols. Yeah. Now, Race with the Galaxy, one of my well-known favorites, has symbols. I don't like it in Race either, for the record, but it serves two functions. One, it helps make the game more easy to localize because it's less language dependent. Two, the symbols allow seasoned players to very quickly identify what their cards do just by scanning them once over. They don't have to read anything, so it's faster recall with it. Okay, so I'll forgive the symbols. Don't like them, but I can live with them. In this, what the heck? The symbols, not only do they portray what should be very simple effects, In other words, a beer gives you a hit point. You could have just written that. It just gives you one bullet. Bang, deal damage to one other person at your range. You could have written that sentence out. It's not very complicated. But not only are they unhelpful, they're misleading and they're incomplete. So if you just use the reference card, let's say there's 8 reference cards, I deal them out to every player at the beginning of the game and say, okay, your cards will have these symbols. Just look at the reference card. You don't need me to tell you. These are so simple, right? Wrong. These symbols are completely misleading. Unless you are actually looking in the one copy of the rulebook, unless you count the rulebook in Italian, then you won't know that they draw a card or discard a card symbol when applied to other players allows you to do it randomly from their hand or chosen from in front of them.
Right.
There's no way to indicate that on the card. In addition, there's simply the lack of certain symbols. This is the expansion version of the reference card, so they redid it. When they redid it, they changed certain symbols. The bang symbol changed, and the beer symbol changed. I don't know why, but instead of, at least if they were going to change them, you'd think, well, they'll update them with more symbols that were included purely in the expansion. No. They don't include the discarded card for a particular effect symbol. You won't find this anywhere on the reference card. Look for yourself. In addition, you don't have the draw symbol anywhere. There's nothing on the reference card to explain that. You don't have the line through symbol to note what happens if there are 2 different symbols. You'll get both. That's not on the reference card. So if you can't really use the reference card for any meaningful purpose because it doesn't tell the players all the information they need. And if they do look at it, it will give them potentially misleading information.
I agree that the symbols don't really work. I think what they were trying to do is keep the game looking light like it is. That didn't really succeed, you're right. But as I said earlier, the best thing about it is that it's a light, fun game. I think another pro on this game is that it's such a light game for such a large group. It's kind of hard to find those. When you have a light game, they usually cap out at maybe 6 people, 4 to 6 usually. And if you get larger groups, it's either like a party game or like team strategy type thing. But there's not really like individual, light, fun, large group games. I think this serves that role well.
Yeah, the only other one that I can even think of is Kung Fu Fighting, and this is a little better than that. But that said, yeah, you can play this with a lot of people if you can find a lot of people who don't mind a lot of crap in their game. So it's just, so what I mean, the technical definition of crap here, folks, is there's just so much rulesiness for such a light game. Everyone knows that I like elegant design. I can forgive a little bit of inelegance in larger games that, make it worth it to me.
Sure.
For instance, we talked last week about Battlestar Galactica. Battlestar Galactica, I enjoyed quite a bit. It's a little rulesy. There's a lot going on in Battlestar that you could probably streamline. Raptors, for instance, come to mind.
Sure.
But I can forgive that because the game is so good otherwise that it gets away with it. This one, no excuse. There's way too much rulesiness for what an otherwise very, very light and easy game is. It took way longer to do the tutorial than I really would have liked it to because the green card rules are a little unintuitive. You have to play them down. Now, granted, they're in the expansion. They're not in the base game. But you have to play them in front of you, let them sit for a turn, then activate them. They're just this weird hybrid between browns and blues.
Yep.
They don't seem to have much of a role. They don't seem to have enough of a definitive place in the game for how unintuitive they are. They're not that bad, though. But when you have the draw mechanic versus draw. So the term draw a card is in the game, of course, present as in most card games. But this game also has draw with an exclamation point. That means, of course, that you flip the top card, look at the poker suit and value at the bottom, and determine whether or not this effect is a success or not.
Bonus, yeah.
That's fine, and I get why they called it draw. It's nice and thematic. But really, did you have to use that word twice? Did you have to use the same word for 2 very different effects? So, yeah, that one bothers me. The beer having additional rules, the jail having an additional rule, the fact that you cannot play beer when there are only 2 players left in the round, the fact that you can play beer as a last resort to be like, oh, it's fine, I had a beer, I'm not dead. The fact that you can't jail the sheriff, these are all perfectly thematic. But there's nowhere they're depicted on the cards. There's no way to know these rules or remember these rules unless you've been playing Bang quite a bit. And in which case, why aren't you playing something else? So yeah, I think those are the ones that really irk me. Is because they went with the symbols, because they committed to that route, there's no sort of reminder text, there's no sort of part in the text where they can explain those kind of niche rules. So again, I do not want in a game like this to be looking through a rule book.
Yeah. Boy, you really came out shooting on that one. And
I'm going to let that go. I'm going to let that go, Tom.
And now that we're done with our point counterpoint review, we can talk about it honestly. I think you may have already done that.
I certainly did. I never hold back, Tom.
For me, I totally agree. There's way too many rules, the elements. If you remember, I really like Munchkin because it's a social game. I think you're going to get the same kind of effect here. If you come to the table expecting to have fun and you're just going to, and you know the game, this will be a fun social game. Otherwise, if you don't have someone who really knows the game at the table, if you're learning it for the first time, you're probably better off avoiding it. So 5 out of 10 for me.
Again, I'm not crazy about this one, but it's not as bad as Munchkin. Tom is being way too cruel to this one. It's nowhere near as bad as Munchkin. It's probably about 5 times as good. I'd give it a 5 out of 10. It's a perfectly kind of mediocre game. I can see, again, I have it in my collection. I don't plan on getting rid of it, partly because it's really small. So there's not much of an impetus for me to, make the shelf space. Also because I can't deny that it's very popular in my play group. People really do like this one. I got into it for a while. I can still enjoy a game of Bang, but I had to bring a lot of the fun on my own, kind of like you said with Munchkin. With this one, you kind of have to be willing to role play a little bit. You have to be willing to kind of play up what you're doing. No matter what you're doing, no matter what role you are, you want to really try to convince the sheriff that you're a deputy, even though it's mostly futile.
Yeah.
So yeah, this one, it can be fun. It's fun how raucous it is, and just seeing bullets kind of whizzing around the table can be kind of funny. So again, it's fine, nothing special. I think it's the lowest score I've given out in the show so far, but I'm comfortable with it.
No, Munchkin was lower.
Right, yes, thank you.
If you count it as a game.
Well, of the games we've reviewed, this is the lowest. So yeah, 5 out of 10 on this one for me.
All right, get ready for the breakdown of Bang. Strap on your 6 guns, because this is the breakdown of Bang. Game time will vary wildly. Some games will be really short, and some games will be really long. But I think in the long run, most games will tend toward the short side of the scale, so we give it 45 long and 55 short. We give it 60 fast and 40 slow. The turns are pretty short, but you're only occasionally engaged on other players' turns. We give it 10 skill because you're sometimes holding cards in reserve for play later, and you're usually trying to figure out who it's best to shoot, but most of the game is luck, so we give it 90. It's a nearly even split between strategy and tactics at 45-55. We give the edge to tactics because most card effects don't carry over from turn to turn. We give it 5 independence because there's very few cards that you play on yourself that only affect you, and 95 interaction because most cards are interactive and because you're always trying to read the other players. We give it 20 abstraction because the character roles don't quite fit the theme, especially with the deputy, but 80 immersion because the rest of the game really does feel like a spaghetti western shootout. We give it 70 simplicity and 30 complexity. It's not a very deep game, but there are many rules to remember and you are going to need to reference the rulebook a lot. We give it 90 portability and 10 grandeur. It's a very small game. It does take up a fair bit of table space, but you could pare it down to make it more portable with just cards. We give it 80 expandability and 20 completeness. We do highly recommend the Dodge City expansion, otherwise the game might feel a little short. For our trophy scales, we give it 3 trophies in originality. The range mechanic of how you shoot people is pretty original, and even though they don't work the greatest, the character roles are fun. And 3 trophies for value. It is a very inexpensive game, and the components are just fine. Both Mike and Tom give it a 5 out of 10, and that is the breakdown for Bang.
We hope you had a wild time with us today in Bang. Next week, in the Chit Chat, we're going to be talking about why we play games. And we'll be playing Neuroshima Hex, the tile-based strategy game.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel for weekly updates. See the links below for our Facebook, Twitter, and Kickstarter pages, trying to fund Season 3. And leave us a comment on the games that give you false choices.
See you next week.
seems like you have a choice between talking and not
Ashton.
talking.
Well, it seems you have a choice between pooping and not pooping. You big pooper.
No, you don't have a choice when it comes to pooping and not pooping.
Now I know, internet.